keynote speaker, Mr. Tim Burke. He is no stranger to this forum. Mr. Burke is the government-wide category executive for travel and director, Office of Travel, Employee Relocation and Transportation at the Federal Acquisition Service under GSA. That's a mouthful. But due to his extensive experience as a corporate executive in the travel industry, he was recruited into the federal government in 2000 from the private sector to lead multiple eGov initiatives, which have resulted in the successful launch of GovTravels and becoming of that eGovTravel. He's been a senior executive in the senior executive service since 2007, coming into the government, bringing that experience in leadership. He has provided subject matter expertise and procurement support to many customers across all departments in the government. He does this so that people can stay focused on their mission. Mr. Burke prides himself in improving the delivery of service while bringing savings to customers. It is no surprise that he has received many awards, including the prestigious President's Rank Award. Business Travel News has named him one of the top 25 most influential executives 3 times. Of note to this group, he is the co-chair of the Senior Travel Officials Council. And Mr. Burke is a great American, I can tell you. He is a pretty good golfer, I can tell you as well. He's a good friend. He's been a career-long advocate for government travelers. Ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Tim Burke.
Got it. Yep, thank you. Morning. Wow. You guys weren't at the reception last night. Perfect. The last time I saw my name that big and black was on a summons, so I'm a little concerned. But thank you. Admiral, Andy, thank you very, very much for many things. But I want to make a couple quick comments. I spoke to this group at National Harbor in 2015. I got a chance to speak again in 2017, and I'm now invited again. I'm privileged to speak in 19. I said to myself this morning, those are odd numbers, odd ball. I'm trying to figure out that's why I'm getting invited every other year. But the one thing I will tell you, and as we get through this talk today, there are 2 odd year dates coming up that will align to the continuous transformation for travel and then travel and expense management, 2023 and 2027. So I appreciate being on the oddball train, and I'll try to tie that into you. For a couple other points I'd like to make. If anyone wants to raise their hand when I ask this question, I'll do the best I can to look through the lights and find you. But I want to know if you can add all of these up and explain what it means for us going forward. Cloud to security, AI to machine learning, EDI to XML, blockchain to RPA, and NDC to GDS. Nobody's raising their hand. Okay, so I looked at the agenda. Very strong agenda. I look at the audience, strong attendance. From what I understand, it's been the best attendance in years. It's putting GovTravels on the map. I want to congratulate Bill Mansell, his team, Mr. Booth, the leadership they're providing, Andy Brown, the entire organization that supports this. The civilian side of the government is going to continue to focus on this as the singular, industry-related, issues-focused event every year. So I'm very proud to be part of that. I will tell you that I think the issues at hand are the most exciting that I remember in my entire professional career. I'll frame it for you a little bit. Carl Lotzko works for NDTA, and I used to work for Carl Lotzko twice. You know what I thought was the most exciting thing I ever was involved in travel? When United Airlines bought Pan American. Does anybody remember that? They actually went global. Now you look at it today, and you have Middle Eastern Airlines buying Boeing aircraft, buying Airbus, buying them in record numbers. The world gets around the world much quicker today with and without the internet. So I think it's a very exciting time for travel. I'll try to tie that into this. So as the opening slide says, I'm going to give you an update on category management. I talked about the beginning of it in 2017. In 2016 is when the Executive Office of the President decided to make this a institutional strategy for procurement. And I was fortunate to be one of the 10 category execs chosen to look at $300 to $350 billion of common goods and services spent every year. And I'll try to touch on how far that has come. And I want to point something out. You know, I've heard all sorts of stories about government taking a long time to get things done. I was in the private sector before I joined the government, and I remember when Defense Travel System was first being launched. Now you're in Defense Travel System modernization. Things do take time in the government. It's the single largest enterprise in the world. It's the most complex enterprise in the world. And it does things around the world probably better than anyone, with those two goalposts being the reality of getting things done. So let me take you down a little bit of road on category management. See if I get this thing right. All right, the evolving government marketplace. Let me give you the recap of the last 2 years since I saw you last. We were just launching category executives. They were just launching frameworks of engagement across the entire federal space. The maturation of the government-wide category management initiative is being driven by the President's management agenda in this administration. So it's true, two administrations from opposite sides of the aisle can actually look at good business decisions and carry them forward. I want to talk to you about some of the advances. But most noteworthy for me in my job and the role that I've had to reach out to try to start to map and architect a way to deal with this monster of spending and these fragmentation of data and many, many different program offices all over the world trying to do good work every day, generally because they have an independent view of what their mission is. Our job is to sort of unify that. Bill Booth and Bill Mansell are two exceptional leaders. I don't know how to say that any more graciously, but leaders in action. Leaders in actions make decisions. And I remember meeting Bill Booth as I was meeting Bill Mansell, and I came over to the Pentagon and by myself and said, you know, they didn't give me a script. They didn't tell us exactly what the KPIs would be, the key performance indicators to measure against. So I walked in as best I could and asked, how can I help? How can we work together to make things go forward with the full intent that I was wearing a hat from the General Services Administration. Now, I love GSA. It's been really good to me. It's given me a chance to learn a career that I never thought would be as exciting as it is, and it's even more so. But when I wear my hat as the government-wide category executive for travel and relocation, by the way, and I'll touch on relocation in just a minute, I wear a government-wide hat. I do not wear a General Services Administration hat. I'm fortunate to work with great colleagues at GSA who are very committed to delivering services and not just make money off a transaction, because we look like as a business that has to recover its costs. We share one thing in common. Taxpayers pay our bills, and we get our bills paid for at GSA by regenerating the dollars put into these solutions. So if we work together, we have the best opportunity to put those price points where the discounts will leverage that buyback, and we'll have this continuous cycle of continuous improvement. But at the core of this, and I cannot minimize this, to have two leaders in Bill Booth and Bill Mansell embrace change, willing to take a look at the work they've been doing great for years and say, how do we do it together, was unparalleled for me. And I was involved in many eGov initiatives, as Andy mentioned at the opening. I will tell you that they were driven by hard mandates. And without those hard mandates, many customers in this audience from the civilian side certainly probably have lived through it. It was painful. It was the right decision, but it was painful. Both bills did not have a mandate to do this, but they had an ear, they had an eye, and I will tell you, they are setting the bar effectively high enough that this has a chance to really deliver high value in how Department of Defense, the Defense Travel Management Office under DHRA, is optimizing their strategies through these solutions that are already in place. And that means those solutions need to adjust. And I'll touch on a few of those solutions. But I can't thank you enough, Bill. I don't know if Mr. Booth is here, but I will certainly reach out to him. I will tell you another funny story. one of the first things Bill Booth said to me, you might remember this, Bill Mansell, he goes, so you're walking in, the government-wide category manager, this big thing they're talking about. Notice I had a large staff with me of 0. I had nothing in my brief bag. It was the start, he goes. And I brought up this DTS modernization thing. You know, the first thing he said to me, he goes, look deep in my eyes, and if you know Mr. Booth, he's not a loud guy, unless he gets really passionate, I guess. Do not attempt to slow us down. Do you remember that, Bill? Great statement, but it also revealed many things to me. So the perception is that government to government might be an obstacle. So I've worked with that mantra since that day, and frankly, great, exciting things, as I said, are happening. This DTS modernization, and I'll point out some things in just a second, is timed very well to continue to drive not only innovation, but continuous improvement to the baseline that's already in place. The last thing I'll touch on is ETS Next. For those of you that know what ETS is, that's the civilian side version in a nutshell of what DTS is today on the DoD side. ETS followed DTS. DTS modernization's now out in front of ETS Next. To talk about the category management principles for just a second. So when I wake up every day and I think about this job, these are the things that are generally at the forefront of the analysis, generally at the forefront of what we're prioritizing. Increased spend under management. I'll talk to you about what that means. Reduced contract duplication, very important. Administrative savings come from that. Volume savings, that's leveraging the buying power of the federal government. Enhanced transparency. You heard Andy open up, he talked about transparency. It is a big deal. It invokes dialogue and brings folks to common understanding of a discussion. And when those things start to take place, great things happen, especially when silos and fragmentation are at the forefront of it. Shared best practices. That's an easy thing to say, a hard thing to relate across government. The government is unique. We don't do everything the same way commercial does, and I got some feedback. Sorry I couldn't be here the last day and a half, but if I understand correctly, and Bill, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it was either you or both of you and Mr. Booth identified the DTS modernization going to fully leverage the commercial way of doing things and the ability to move DoD in the direction of commercial. It is singularly, in my opinion, that the breakthrough strategy for what will happen government-wide. So we're looking to partner up and learn as you go. Better contract vehicles and purchases. I always like that term vehicles every time I hear it. Coming from the private sector, contract solutions, contract instruments, but contract vehicles, I think I'm hopping in a fleet car. But there are contracts out there, and we look to purchase as the best we can. Efficient contract management process for suppliers. Let's not minimize that last line and that last word. So suppliers are in the space here. You're the engine, you are the blood that drives solutions into the government space. You know, the beauty of being in government work that I found, one of them, many, is the ability to look at suppliers as true partners and know that suppliers make up what American economy is all about. And so it's in our best interest to buy in a way that's attractive, a way that's motivating, a way that's incentive to suppliers to want to do business with the federal government. We have a commissioner at the Federal Acquisition Service, Alan Thomas. First time there's been a political appointment to that job. And, you know, Alan came from the private sector. I'm sure he won't be here forever, but he has a great view on how to do business with the federal government. I asked him one day when he first came on board, you know, what gets your attention of wanting to do this job? He says, as a supplier, all I want to do is bid on business that I have a chance to win. And what I want the government to do is make that linear efficient so that the suppliers invest the time in the things they're best at. So contracting is a formality, a legality, and to a degree can be a little bit bureaucratic. The mission we're on in category management and procurement, and you'll see it on most of my slides, enterprise-wide, easy and efficient, easy to say those words, harder to implement it. But that's where the commitment is. I also want to emphasize something more about what Andy said about transparency. Transparency, along with that comes data. Data, understanding data and turning that into information is what creates that common dialogue. It is a very big challenge when we continue to fragment how we buy and how we implement. So it's critical that this engagement continues to bring the data to the forefront. So I'm going to share with you why I think it's important that the top-down leadership of the federal government, from administration to administration, and the senior management people at every federal entity, both on defense and the civilian side, have the power of the federal government executive branch all the way to the president leading initiatives like this. So I'm just sharing with you a few slides here. There's a lot of words on here, folks. I know this will be posted up for you. You can look at them when you want, but I want to point out a couple of things. This is a high priority for the president's management agenda, and I believe it'll continue to whatever the next president is, because it started with the previous president. It is an outrageous effort to corral this amount of buying, and as I've said many times, silos and fragmentation, but without top-down commitment to it, as you would find in any large corporation, it's difficult to pull off, but it's working. So let me touch a few points for you. The terms spend under management. Let me share with you the myths, the legends, and the clarity about it. It isn't that complicated, and it doesn't mean one contract and one agency owns it, all right? Spend under management is having full transparency and buying in reference to the disciplines of category management that we mentioned. The one area that we're focusing on right now, more than anything, and I would say two areas on a goalpost, which we would call tier zero spend. That's unmanaged spend. That's open market spend. There's no connectivity to the rest of the purchasing world of the federal government when those types of contracts are done. They're generally done in a vacuum. They're generally done without much engagement anywhere else but the buying office. So we're trying to identify all that money that's being spent in that tier zero, and I'll touch on it for travel in just a second. But tiers 1, 2, and 3. Tier 3 is what we call best-in-class solutions. They're used government-wide. They meet the rigorous standards of engagement with customers. They meet the rigorous standards of quality KPIs. Tiers 1 and 2 can be very effective spend under management solutions. If it's an agency-mandated program, for example, I received something this morning. I'll touch on it when we get on the travel category a little bit more specifically. Rideshare is one of the areas, or ride hailing. Some folks would call them Uber and Lyft, not to just isolate on those two vendors. We've been trying to get our hands around how much money we're spending on taxis in the federal government, and I'll show you a slide up here in a minute. Yeah, it'll be interesting how we dug into the data and found out it was significantly more. But I saw that there was a release, and I think Army did an IDIQ, and the first reaction was, oh, Army's out there buying rideshare. Actually, they're buying it with MWR, okay? So is that really the same as buying on official duty travel? It's not. So it's very important to understand where these contracts are coming from, what their intent is. And frankly, I'm anxious to see how well it goes with MWR. I think MWR is doing some things with Priceline. These are fantastic initiatives that generally consumer-based drives corporate down the long run. We all know that consumer-based is the most social economy active marketplace in the world. So I want to explain those spend under management tools to you. So we're fortunate in the travel category, and I'll touch on 4 of those. The Defense Travel Management Office is the owning office of one of the big solutions. That's the car rental program, and it's doing very, very well. The second slide that I'm going to push up here for you is what is talked about in the overview of what the goal statements are. And if you'll see what's in red there, I think it's critically important to understand that we have specific goals that these 10 category execs are working with the White House and OMB on, and the federal agencies and suppliers to a great degree. $18 billion in savings is the target, and 50,000 reduction in individual contracts. And we're making a big dent, and we're close to hitting all of those targets. And travel's already accomplished a significant amount of that. It was started before even category management became a discipline and an official institutionalized initiative. But the challenges I've talked on, I'm not going to read through a line item by line item for you, but these things matter. They very much matter in the delivery of supporting, in the case of DOD, the warfighter, force multiplier, civilian side, doing the good work for the American people associated with the mission of that particular agency. Unequivocally, that is the first question in any one of these strategies that has to come from the category management efforts. They have to understand what the mission objectives are, and then use the data, and then use the existing solutions to determine do we have something that could be better and more efficient so that the transfer of those resources will go back to the mission of those offices? Make no bones about it. I just as soon as my GSA hat see us get paid less and see that money turned into further mission development and the accomplishment of a DOD and HHS and many other civilian agencies that are part of the process. Let me take you further. This is the makeup and the leadership that is driving day-to-day outcomes for category management. Leslie Field is the head of the Office of Federal Procurement Policy. Lisa Hirschman I have not met, but she's, I believe, the acting chief management officer of the Department of Defense. This is what I was referring to. Top down, these two individuals carry the weight and influence of both policy and execution associated with getting these things done. That's why things are happening. And I think it's a fantastic reflection on the federal government actually starting to mirror what effectively can get done as best practice in the private sector. And let me touch on that a little bit. When this got launched, I signed a commitment document as one of the category execs in 2017. 2016 is when we formed it. 2017 is when they finalized the document. So it's out 2016. That's 10 years, 2026, and I'll touch on those dates in a minute. But we also didn't jump in a giant room with just government people and say, you're in charge, this is how we're going to do it. Companies like EY, P&G, IBM has spent countless hours working with the White House and working with category executives on the models that have been successful in those very large, global, and diverse companies. So we've effectively tried to mirror and learn from the best principles in category management that have been, frankly, a stalwart of performance management in the private sector. I'll give you some examples of some success that have gone on, and I won't spend too much time. There's a lot of success stories. U.S. Department of Treasury used the Acquisition Gateway, which you'll see down in the bottom right-hand corner, which is a portal gathering information and participation of all acquisition professionals and program management around the government. 25,000 registered trained federal employees have access and are using the gateway today. We've got a lot more employees that probably should tap that, but it's growing now almost exponentially. But U.S. Treasury used the gateway to drive all of their acquisition folks in there to find, and anytime they're going to purchase, they have to go through the list of the 10 best-in-class solutions before they even initiate a contract. Laptops, they've standardized the buying basic standard of laptops, and I'll just give you a small example of this. The U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum used the new contracts they got off the Category Management Initiative. Doesn't sound like a big deal. On DOD, it probably doesn't sound like a lot of money. They saved $74,000 off of 30 different desktop configurations they bought. That's a lot of money for the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. And I'll stop with the Federal Housing Finance Agency. Their POUT, the ability to administer contract time, which is critically important, how much time goes out on the street when you deal with industry, when you deal with the people and the cost structure associated with that. They dropped their time to get to market by 50%. These are the things that are starting to happen that are going to have a long-term institutional transformation for how we procure. All right, I'm sticking that up there, not so you can see my face down in the corner, but I will tell you that I highlighted two boxes. These are the 10 category executives currently in the government space. They have the responsibility to work with folks in this room, heads of agencies, program managers, the executive office of the president on determining the strategies in these 10 key areas. The reason I identified transportation and logistics service, I heard Andy say, because when he was going to school, I don't think they were really teaching logistics as a bachelor's degree at the time. And when I said I was going to be in the airline business, everybody thought I was going to be a pilot. So I understand that. But I want to point out two very important points. And I know there's some things happening at DOD that I think are also very exciting in the transportation area. Transportation category manager and the travel category manager overlap some areas. When we launched the category model and the inventory, we did some trade-offs. Clearly, some of the things in travel really belong in transportation. Buying helicopters is not a travel manager's responsibility, but that was showing up on a lot of the contracts that were itemized underneath the travel category. Relocation is the one that got my attention the most. Relocating people, buying homes, home sale assistance is a lot different than household goods. And the household goods in the Department of Defense is a critical mechanism to move the men and women around the world to get the job done that is critical to support the warfighter and meet the objectives of the Department of Defense. When I look at household goods that are on the civilian side, do about $100 million a year. It's a lot of money. When you look how much they do on the DoD side, multiply it by 10 plus. And there's an initiative out, household goods privatization, that's being talked about. Big deal. My role is going to pick up the phone, talk to the transportation category manager, and find out how do we align the $100 million on the civilian side to what comes out of that. Now, I've gotten to know DoD very well, and I'll say this with the greatest respect. Your mission never wavers. We get it, I want it, never waver. But I've watched with the leadership of both Bills and others I've worked with at DoD, and I will certainly talk to General James afterwards. I look forward to it. What we do at CRAF and what happens at Air Mobility Command and U.S. Transcom have been fantastic good news stories with city parents, some other issues. So I think we know how important and how critical it is to put the mission of DoD first. But DoD remains the single largest buying power in the world. And at that position, I will always ask this question in the role I'm in, because I feel it is the most responsible thing to do. How can we help you still meet your objectives so that the benefits of that $100 million, let's say household goods, can be optimized? You know, we have a small little system over at GSA, because this reports up to my GSA job. We're putting some money into that system to upgrade so the usability by the end users can be improved, both suppliers and travelers and program managers and relocation employees, relocated employees. I don't want to do that again next time. If household good privatization can do that, I certainly know technology allows modular development to take care of micro development of capabilities where the requirements are basically at the baseline pretty similar, right? And the supply chain is pretty similar. So I think these are the opportunities that when there wasn't category management, these dialogues were not going on. So I'm a big fan for it. I'll also touch on something else that I'm certainly, General James and others probably already know. One of the greatest stories was the merger of FedEx, UPS contracts, DHL, into the transportation category at Transcom. Now, I will tell you, as a business person at GSA, we had a long-standing contract called DDS2. It was one of our most successful programs. When category management came around the corner, DoD put a stake in the ground. They said, this is critical to the way we manage our logistical support for the warfighter around the world. Make no bones about it. That business that was done at GSA was wholesale transferred to what is now known as NGDS. So let me tell you a little somewhat unknown fact. That's been launched, it's been implemented, it's based against a new type of contract. For those folks that understand transportation, logistics, doesn't have travel much anymore, but it does still happen in transportation logistics. There's a thing called tenders. Tenders are the way they use bills of lading to acquire certain movements of goods, right? So tenders, we were managing on the civilian side on small package delivery. So air freight, small parcel delivery was being shipped through tenders. Didn't have much visibility and transparency to benchmark that. Today, that's all being governed and oversight through a global program at Transcom. NGDS is flourishing. And I just got a brief the other day that $4 million of overcharges that was the average that we were seeing in these air freight bills, we're not seeing them anymore. The reason that is they've contracted for it effectively. They've used disciplined approaches to manage that, and they've gotten their hands around that business process. So there is significant carry-on to the benefits of these types of models. I don't believe the government's ever going to go backwards. I think they're going to stay where they're at. I'll give you another thought about what NGDS has done. They've also created a demand management process by which the $92 cost that they were averaging on next day, first thing in the morning deliveries that we were averaging across the government has been dropped down to $18 with midday, with midday delivery. Still overnight, but midday delivery. These are critical dollar savings that go back into the missions of each of the agencies. And absent a disciplined global buying position, data analysis, data accessibility, subject matter expertise, and a willingness to drive to the principles that are identified on that second slide, we're going to leave that $92 on the table. Goal structure. These are the goals that the category management teams work towards. I'll just point out two. The category managers develop strategies to designate best in class. I'll talk about 4 of them that we have here in the travel category today, travel and relocation. Best practices I've touched on. Commercial best practices. So DTS modernization is going to be a great subject area that I hope happens over the next few years. Agency-specific strategies. That doesn't mean everything has to go to a single government-wide contract. Agencies can drive their own mission much more efficiently sometimes than the government getting all together and figuring out how we're going to do it for them better than they know how to do it themselves. So the sharing the buying data, though, still is critical. So if there's an individual contract at one agency that agency is using, another buying is going on, it's my team's job to bring that buying information to the community dialogue and to determine whether or not there are strategies, short-term, mid-term, long-term, that might have a positive effect on enhancing that. Can't get anything done, in my opinion, unless you measure it over the long haul. It's important for you to know that the Executive Office of the President and OMB does have KPIs. These are the KPIs. Let me just touch on them a second. The one I want to point out a lot is cumulative cost avoidance. The travel category alone in the state it's in, even though we're not the biggest category, transportation, for example, is identified as $30 billion. It's bigger than that, but I'll explain the difference between $30 billion and what might be really spent. Right now, we're moving up to 11.5 in addressable spend, but we're delivering almost $3 billion in cost avoidance. So the travel and relocation category is doing a great job. It's well down the path of success. I just hope we continue to mirror it as we're going forward. I'll also emphasize the small business success. We're at 30%. That's above our goal. It will always be an important responsibility on socioeconomic objectives. Not always as easy as it sounds. So the small businesses that are in this room, small business has to work as hard as the big businesses to get the business, and we have to be as open to understand how to help those small businesses get that job done. I'm always open to it in the job that I sit in, both GSA and category management. If there's opportunities out there on the small business side that we haven't quite framed right, phone's available, the email's available, I'd like to hear about it. So let me tell you what happened in 17. 17, we identified $8.5 billion. I want to take it down to the right-hand corner, far to the right. You see a little thing called taxi there, $14 million? I thought I mentioned that to you earlier. Well, let me take it forward after all the data analytical work that's been done. 2019. Take a look at ride sharing. It says 1.4 million. We've just done the analysis on this, and we believe that the ride sharing spend around taxis is $162 million a year. And so the challenge we're going to have is how do we go to market on that? How did we get to 11.7 billion in 2 years? Wow, the government spent a lot more money on travel. No, we're actually just identifying where it's being spent. An emphasis I'll point out to you, you might see a long-term lodging might be difficult to read. $600 and some million there. Most of that long-term lodging is geared towards specific mission support. And then there's emergency lodging that also is over $600 million. Wow, $600 million a year. If you go backwards, the lodging number was much smaller. How did you go from single digits in the millions to 600 million? Well, there was significant hurricane damage, significant natural disasters across the good portion of the United States, from dastardly and devastating fires to water, wind, and hurricanes. Well, guess who does that work? FEMA, along with DOD, Army Corps of Engineers, and a lot of support systems. Well, that's the amount of money that was spent into emergency lodging by itself. So there's significant interest on how to get our hands around this. We don't have all the solutions that are well matured and cycled into high returns yet, but we're getting close to identifying where the money is. So I'm going to give you the state of the category and close it up for a minute. It's not a State of the Union edition, but it is the state of the travel category. So from my seat, the state of the travel category is strong, it's robust, and it's improving. I want to just sort of stroll down the right side of this. Object Class 21, because my understanding is Mr. Booth identified, he runs a $9 billion enterprise of travel, right, with you. And they're saying, wow, $9 billion. And we only had $8.5 billion in 2017. There's a lot that goes into getting travel completed and the many elements that were on those straw man charts. Object Class 21 is the president's budget. Shows up $16 billion a year. $9 billion of that is probably being spent at D&D, like both Mr. Mansell and Mr. Booth have identified. That means the remainder of that's on the civilian side. Is it close to being right? It is, but some data shows up in other object classes like 25. So that's the budget process, right? The travel category domain is $11.7 billion. That's what I showed you on the previous slide. So we've identified spend specifically by subcategory on that. The next number down is $5.3 billion, spend addressed by BICS, best-in-class solutions that are in place, and the 19 and 20 initiatives, which are part of plans that are signed off by both the head of OFPP and the customer community group as we go forward on category strategies. There's $2 billion in 19 and 20 we want to leverage in to either a new solution or into the BICS. So if we are successful going into 2021, we'll have answered the question whether that $2 billion can fall into that 5.3. At that point in time, we're going to be close to $8 billion out of the $11 billion being run through BICS. It's a target that I think is achievable. I think this is going to be a stretch in some of the areas, but I'll touch on one very important initiative, actually two, that again, it's going to sound like a love fest with DTMO and DoD. Well, consider it a love fest. I consider it to be one of the most monumental professional engagements I've ever been involved in. But Andrea Carlock, Dane Swenson, Lori Leffer, I saw you, Lori, there you are. Hi, Dane, good to see you. They're leading the process to leverage the existing contracts around lodging and TMCs, travel agencies. Travel management centers. I will also tell you that this is at the core of what we want to get done in category management. I'll also tell you that DoD has its specific missions. And as I've said when I opened up, our job is singular. Understand the agency's missions, make sure that we do contract solutions that are flexible enough and effective enough so that those missions are being accomplished. They're in the middle of that right now. I'm more than excited and very anxious to get them implemented. I can't thank them enough. The leadership, Bill, I know you have on your team, has worked very, very hard to try to figure this out. We're breaking down old barriers and old silos. We're trying to figure out how to do business fiscally together. We're trying to figure out how to do business from a strategy side. The strategies may have overlapped with certain things. Our job is to clean those up and get the very best out of it. So let me talk to you about the 4 BICS and what they do to contribute to that $3 billion. Car rental, home sale, city pair program, and FedRooms. The reason FedRooms is in red there, it's the big opportunity. There is almost $3 billion when you load in all the costs associated, taxes, miscellaneous around lodging spend in the federal government annually. Certainly DoD has the lion's share of that. There is a preferred program which they've created, and they've done some very smart things from a legislative perspective to a policy perspective to a system delivery perspective that's allowing them to prove their strategy from pilot and concept to hopefully full execution. That $1 billion in lodging spend that's sitting out there right now is proven by not only what DTMO has done with their preferred program, but what FedRooms is doing over the last 5 to 8 years. It's trending up. Hoteliers seem to want to do business with it. They're active in their responses to the RFPs. And it's a big year for the travel category in 2 areas, as I mentioned. Lodging, FY19 contract hopefully is going to be on the street, and include the strategy joint with DTMO to go to market on it. The TMCs, the process has already begun for 22 contracts being consolidated into 12. And the market, I think, is going to see the first RFP, if I'm correct, DTMO, in the next 3 months minimum, right? April. And then I think APHIS NextCom, right? And then I believe Navy right to follow. Small piece of business called Navy, right? All right. One of the largest travel contracts in the world, and unique, if I'm correct, that the current model at Navy is a management fee contract, correct? And the majority of all of our other contracts in TMCs are transaction fee. So we're really starting to break through the glass ceiling of what makes sense for the business going forward. So let me take it one back. Okay, so these are the approved initiatives for 19 and 20. I've touched on them already, but I want to point out the 4th bullet down. drive emerging solutions for rideshare and ride hail. I touched on it earlier. $162 million in the business case was identified as what that addressable spend is. And I'm going to be very forthcoming with everyone. We haven't been able to figure out how to contract for this yet. And I'll give you some thoughts that go into this. So a traveler, and I don't know, I haven't had the chance to talk to DTMO about this directly, as I was briefed last week about it. A traveler hails a ride with a Lyft or an Uber, not being brand specific. How do they pay for it? How do you guys pay for it as a consumer? How do you pay for it if you hail a rideshare? Anybody? What? Credit card. Do you give them the plastic? Nope. It's almost a virtual payment, right? Okay. So on the civilian side, ETS, almost every civilian agency puts their local vouchers into that system. I got your attention yet? They have to go into a system, get somebody to approve it, do a voucher, and get reimbursed. That's not the way the social economy is working today. Not even close. So as we go to contract for these, we're going to turn to the suppliers who have created this and have grown. Most of you probably know this. Uber and Lyft comprise of the most expensive brand in the United States and North America and corporate America. In FY18, it wasn't Chris Ruth's Steakhouse. It wasn't American Airlines, no offense, America. It wasn't Hertz Rental Car. It was Uber and Lyft. 3 years ago, not even close. So the change has taken place, and how fast can the government embrace it? It's a very important focus. I had a meeting at the Department of Education. It's now been 18 months since that meeting, and what the Deputy Secretary of Management said to me, I never want to pay for a local voucher again, Tim Burke, ever, ever. You make us go into the GovTravels system, and you produce local vouchers. I can walk out the door, hail the cab, and have it refunded back. All we have to do is think about how to put CBA accounts in play, leverage cloud capabilities and technology, and take the data of that and have that transferable into the ledgers. It's a brand new world that is happening faster than we can catch it. But if we don't embrace it, and we don't embrace it generally collectively, it's going to be difficult to roll out on a government-wide beneficial way. I want to touch on this quickly. Many suppliers in this room. One of the biggest factors that I saw in the success at P&G, IBM, and EY, and other category management-rich organizations out there is this issue of taking contracts. And sure, you got to have contracts. They've got to be legal. They've got to bind us together. It gives us a place to play by the rules, I guess. But it's really the arrow to the right, and that is what we're going to be working on in the upcoming years, really developing the right tactical and strategic relationship with our suppliers. The contracts will just reflect how we do it together. But the dialogue has to go down that way. So the example that I will give, and I pointed it out earlier, the City Pair program and City Pair contract is one of the longest standing contracts in the federal government. It has uniquely positioned to partner with AMC Transcom on craft leverage requirements. And it works. The airlines have participated for 3 decades. The civilian side of the business benefits from having that participation. And I firmly believe in my multiple discussions that I've had and been fortunate to be introduced to many of the leaders at Transcom, it supports the readiness strategy of United States Transportation Command. That's sort of what I'm trying to articulate. How well are we doing that? In the case of the lodging program with DTMO, they have a clear strategy and mission that goes just beyond a lodging program. The dining program, I know, is launched. They have a wholesale view of how they want to serve the men and women, and they're very traveler-centric. We've got to make sure that these contracts are designed and flexible enough so those particular missions are optimized. But I do think that's where this is headed. NGDS and the DDS consolidation is another example of where contracts became strategically leveraged. The relationships with the suppliers of the long haul will end up revealing partnerships and how to do that better. As they innovate, as they're empowered and they're engaged to do business with us, I think you'll see the results start to mature through the category strategies. So let me tell you about the next particular subject that I think is important and at hand here. I mentioned earlier ETS, and I mentioned a couple of dates. I mentioned 23 and 27. So defining the path forward to end-to-end travel and expense. If I understood correctly, Mr. Booth said yesterday, DTS modernization will take 3 to 5 years, right? 3 to 5 years from now is 2023 range, isn't it? 2023 range is the last option period for ETS Next. This looks to be one of the greatest timing parallels to how we deal with platforms, technology. I like to use this term. Everybody's heard of IoT, right? The Internet of Things. I want to know who the AOT is, and that's the architect of those things. And I think what they're doing at DTS modernization, I think we're going to be able to leverage that and balance it. But I want to point out something very, very important about what is going on the government-wide basis, especially on the civilian side. GSA has been charged to create an environment not in the Federal Acquisition Service, but on the headquarters of the administrator around some programs around shared services. It's identified in the 5-year strategic plan at GSA. It's being enhanced by OMB's position on how to consolidate and do businesses that aren't in the core mission of a particular federal agency. Where are they and how are they doing? Well, we've started that with ETS. We've sort of put our fingers in the water and said, okay, how do we develop a process by which we can go from 2 contracts to a more shared service delivery? It's a long process to get it done right, but they've implemented a thing called the Federal Integrated Business Framework. It's a governance to drive common standards. The common standards are critical to have shared services delivery. There's been some progress made on that. I'm going to touch on it in just a second. The governance model, it used to be known as the Unified Shared Services Management Office, is now the Office of Shared Solutions and Performance Improvement. They have one single mission, and that is to marry the USSM office, the Unified Shared Service Management Office, and the CXO offices, for those that are familiar with the Chief Information Officer role, the Chief Technology Officer role, the Chief Human Resources role, the Chief Financial Officer's role. That's the CXO group that OMB uses that GSA office to sort of fund and build those communities of practice. They've merged those 2 offices because the CFOs of the world, the CIOs of the world are the ones that are going to help us craft these strategies and architectures. It's making progress, so travel has started on that. Let me tell you where, on the civilian side, where they're at. The benefits of the Federal Integrated Business Framework I'll touch on just quickly. It will result in common standards. It will result in common business practices. There's a lot of trade-offs that have to go on, and I'll give you a little hint of how it happened with the folks at GSA leading the ETS Next first phase, the Federal Integrated Business Framework. This is what they've accomplished. They've identified and categorized defined common and specialized business scenarios. They've defined government-wide and agency-specific capabilities and use cases. They've standardized data elements. They've recommended certain policy and financial management reform. Very important. To get policy changed, interpreted in a common way, translated to a new policy, doesn't happen in a year in the federal government. I don't think it happens in 2 years. It's a good long process. 2 to 3 years, maybe. 3 to 5 years to roll out DTS modernization. They did policy simplification before they did DTS modernization. These are the things that have to be done up front. Most folks want immediate results. The immediate results are the progress you make in this area. So let me give you a couple of key points that are on the bottom of this slide. 48 standardization opportunities are recommended through this Federal Integrated Business Framework first phase. The ETS vendors on the civilian side had an opportunity to participate and review and comment on it. 12 agencies are already testing some configuration standards and commonality. We don't think the ETS2 contract is going to be converted to this whole new shared services, folks. That's not even practical. It doesn't make a lot of business sense. These things are up and running. They're working. They're doing a great job. Both vendors on the ETS2 side are helping the federal government on the civilian side get their job done, get travelers where they need to go. They're getting them reimbursed on time, and they're improving as they go. We're trying to instill this so that we can test a little bit about the practicality and the best way to advance, because in 2027, this contract for ETS2 is over. 2023, as I mentioned, is the last option period. And we're excited that DTS modernization is out in front of that, and frankly, using one or two or multiple of the vendors that are on the ETS2 side. So there's a lot in common going on in the federal government. We've just got to find a way to nurse that and marry it to a solution going forward. I'll give you another point or two. 18 agencies on the civilian side participated in this federal integrated business framework. So the progress is continuing. The collaboration, I know it's a big word, but it's more function to me than it is idealism. It is working, and it is starting to bring to the forefront these opportunities that we've started to mention here today. I will put the examples of the FIBIT 4 focus areas of some of the standardization that has come out of this. It's not being implemented yet. It has to go through a whole process with OMB, and I'll talk to you about that in just a second. But temporary duty travel, CONUS and OCONUS, define specifically what that means, conference multi-stop segments, sponsored invitational travel, FEMA surge, IRS's long-term taxable travel, employee ID. This is a good one. One common data element for employee IDs for all of government. That's going to be a bigger lift than we think it is. Obligation of funds, the financial systems. On DoD side, I'm sure if I have it correctly, DTMO, you can correct me if I'm wrong, you guys obligate funds at the point of reservations, am I correct? So does the majority of the civilian side. But there's 15% of the civilian side that does not. So you've got two different views of whether you should be fiscally consistent on that. So that won't happen overnight either. Now, why is that important? Because the financial systems are tightly integrated to that business process. And those interfaces are complex. In the case of the civilian side, there are 45 different instances of those interfaces. So it's, while they've made great progress with e-travel, it's where do you take it next? There are some principal groups. There's an executive steering committee on the civilian side that's behind this ETS Next strategy, and there's a senior travel official council that is critical to support policy reform and these strategies. So what's on the horizon? I opened the conversation with, did anybody want to take a shot at that algorithm I came up with? I've got to tell you something. What did Einstein, I'm not talking about the software, or Watson, the IBM tool, I'm talking about the guy. He said, if you can't explain it simply enough, you do not know the material well enough. So my question to the audience and suppliers are, how best is industry going to help the government understand how to aggregate all of this, consolidate all of this? I know it's not going to be a flip of a switch. So the relationship isn't a contract. The relationship should be ongoing. It should be issues, as both Bill and Andy talked about. These are the issues of today that are affecting our business strategies and decisions for tomorrow. And the thing we want more than anything else is content, right? Content so that we can effectively do our mission best. Today, the smartphone, as I showed up on that slide, is no longer just phone. It's a camera. Plays your music. It's got personal assistant capability to it. That wasn't the case 10 years ago, but it is the case now. So, to recap for everyone, government's category management strategy will be focused on those top 10 categories. $325 billion in common goods and services annually. We're at about 45% capture of all that today. There's opportunities targeted for improved efficiency that will be driven by strong data analytics that will be evidence-based. And it demands interagency collaboration. Maintain and improve and enhance the industry supplier engagement. That probably is the riddle that needs to be answered, especially for this end-to-end travel environment and travel management services. Talked about the key travel initiatives for the next 1 to 2 years. There's a heavy focus on lodging and TMCs, as I mentioned. And DoD has two major initiatives emerging that can shape the future opportunities government-wide, and I've touched on both of them. Slid them in early and have reminded ourselves a couple times. The privatization of household goods, I can't wait to talk to see how, in fact, the rest of government can benefit or learn from it or participate. DTS modernization, we couldn't have a better relationship with DHRA, DTMO. Scott Smith has been gracious in his early starts of this. He said, Tim, get out of our hair for 6 months. We got some work to do. And I know there's a session this afternoon on the prototype. I encourage folks to be there, and I'm hoping I can move a meeting around and attend. So that is it, folks. There's my email. I asked somebody if I should put my phone up there. They said, no, don't put your phone up there. Don't put your phone up there. I said, okay, I'll put my phone up there. But I thank you for giving me not only the time on the podium today, but also for actually, hardly anybody left the room. I think that's great. Fantastic. I hope the message was there. And a part that I wasn't able to explain simply enough, I need to practice more. I think I know everything that was on that slide, but if there's anything that needs clarity, you want to bring it up now, I'm welcome to any questions you may have. So there you go. I don't know, do we have questions? They've begun questions?
Yes, sir. I've got questions coming in on our Q&A app.
Okay.
But if anyone wants to ask a question in person, you have priority if you come to the microphone. Just holler out to me if I don't notice you. So
Next.
over the last day, we've heard a lot about taking stress out of the government traveler's experience and removing friction, making them more efficient when they travel. Can you talk about how that works in the conjunction of the City Pairs program, what you see is happening there, and then kind of related to that is the issue of, is there a way that government travelers can take advantage of some of the benefits that airlines offer their commercial or other business travelers?
Oh, great question. Let's see, I got the back end of it. I'm not sure I heard the front of it. Did I hear the word friction?
Yeah, traveler friction.
Yeah.
Giving them more flexibility.
Yeah, okay. Let me sort of go backwards forward on City Pair side. You know, we've been challenged with a lot of things on the City Pair program. You know, they're going to be up to 13,000 markets. When I first came to in 2020, when I came to government, we were at 3,200 markets. Went from 3,200 to 13,000. We've got almost 83% of all of the spend flowing through the City Pair discount strategies, right? And the airlines have been fantastic. They've continued to support the unique mission requirements of federal government. Last seat availability, I'll come back to that in just a second. Really, last seat availability, right? They allow you to exchange it. They allow you to move on a dime and not pay the dime. That's a pretty unique benefit, and I think that reflects the respect the suppliers have for the mission that government folks have, what they do every day for taxpayers and for this country. So I think it's an outrageously unique and strongly benefited program for our operations and for use of it. As far as some of the benefits associated with being a consumer traveler, you know, that's a big policy question, right? So you get into the issue of entitlements associated with reimbursements, and you start to get into the real dig of how much are we going to put in the hands of the traveler. Now, I personally believe travelers should be fully empowered. I believe that it's a management issue about teaching and telling folks where and how they have to spend, and you need to have the right data and system to balance it. That's all done pretty well. We do a lot of things on these rules, on what they can do and what they can't do based on concerns about whether travelers will be wasting taxpayer money. That's a small amount when it ever happens, folks, but you know, government works a little bit different than private sector. The one mistake has a big view to it. So I think, you know, we spent a lot of time covering that. I'll also say this. I know I'm not the youngest guy in this room for sure, okay? But I look at my office today around me, and the majority of the folks in that office are half my age. I've said this story before. I used to be involved in travel in the private sector almost all my life, and was fortunate enough to own a travel agency and be a part of ownership of some larger travel agencies. My children travel all around the world. They've never used a travel agent once. They're in their 30s. So our attitude about traveling has to move, and it has to move in a direction that is personalized yet managed. So when you do a DTS modernization, I can bet they are very, very comfortable with the quality controls, the internal controls, and the fiscal sides of it. Once that's in order, you're going to want to start pushing these consumer-based personalization capabilities to the forefront. I don't know if that got all of it, but I did the best I could here to answer that question about City Pair. Let me add one point. Last seat availability. There's no question, if you talk to travel managers around the world, that they are looking at premium economy seats in a whole different way than they did 5 years ago. We struggle with last seat availability in the coach part of the airplane. Well, the premium economy seat, coach part of the airplane anymore, the airlines will tell you, well, it's not in first class, but it's coach. But is that really last seat availability? Last time I went to book online as a consumer, and I don't travel anywhere near like I used to, so I don't have status like I used to. Really hard to find a seat without paying a lot for it. So I think it's going to continue to be a challenge. I really would like to learn from the best travel managers in the world. I know our city pair people would like to figure out what we're going to do about as that coach seat becomes more individually directed. And as some of this technology, which we touched on earlier, we know that the supply of technology and solutions, APIs, are going to be more and more personalized to an individual traveler's status and to whether or not they can merchandise to them. So it's going to get very interesting.
Okay, one of the listeners here today noticed the the utilization percentage in Fed rooms is 19.3%.
Yeah.
What's the reason for the low number? And the second part of their question is there going to be a GSA DoD partnership on a lodging program?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the DoD partnership with GSA is already in place. DoD leveraged the FedRooms contract to support their, I think I've got this term down right, correct me if I'm wrong, DTMO, integrated lodging program, right? And I think they're on the commercial hotel utilization, they call that preferred, right? DoD preferred. They've had grand success linking program, procurement, and policy to the delivery of utilization. They have very high utilization on their pilot and their proof of concept. Frankly, that's teaching the rest of the civilian side what the $1 billion can be achieved. My debate with OMB and others is look at what DoD has done already, apply those same virtues. They happen to be best practices, by the way, in the private sector. So I think the answer to your question is, if we don't have a strong partnership with DoD and the lodging strategy, I blew it. Okay, that's what I'll tell you. If we don't have a strong partnership with them, I blew it. I think we're on our way. There's some things that they want to achieve that we've got to say the old residency FedRooms contract and program has to be, a little bit more flexible about it. The 19%, I'm glad you all noticed it. That 19%, if it gets to what best practices are and the number that we're using in the federal government, the business case, is 70%. We believe we can get to 70% of domestic TDY lodging in the major markets. That'll add another $1 billion to that lodging spend. And correct me if I'm wrong, DoD targeting somewhere around $250 million. Am I correct over the next 5 or 6 years? Am I close? Close? Close. Okay, good. So there's $250 million of it right there, right? We hope.
How do you see commercial airfare use impacting the CCP over the next 5-year period?
Oh, gosh. No question, NDC, new distribution capability, I think it's been talked about here. And I've heard nothing but great feedback from the few people I got to see this morning about this agenda and what's being talked about. I remember in the business that they said GDSs, global distribution systems, were dead. They were going to go away. We're all going direct connect. That had to be 8-10 years ago. I remember when NDC was first announced. I think it was around 2012. It's changing the marketplace. I think it's rewriting the language so that who's going to be the next aggregator? GDSs, maybe. Travel management firms, maybe. We're going to work with them to sort of uncover what CPP looks like. But there will be a direct input and impact to the CPP program on how this distribution model unfolds itself. We just got to stay with the market, and we got to ask the market to help us navigate it.
I think we have time for one more.
Nobody's run out yet.
Can you elaborate on the agencies not using obligations? What are the benefits that can be leveraged?
Not sure I get the question. Sorry.
I don't have a.
Say it again. You want me to read it? Let me
Can
read
you
it.
elaborate on the agencies not using obligations? What are the benefits
Okay.
that can be leveraged?
I think this means, I don't know who asked it, and if you want to raise your hand and tell me what I'm not getting, I'll be glad to answer it. Agencies not using obligations at the point of authorization, what are the benefits of that? In short term, I will tell you that the work that the teams have done on the Federal Integrated Business Framework, what they've done on a couple of business strategy case studies they did, going full commercial and using and buying commercial off the shelf, quote unquote, for the services around expense management. Majority of corporations, matter of fact, I haven't found one, do not obligate their funds at the point of authorization. They do not build complex interfaces to financial systems and go back and forth all the time on a simple transaction for travel. The benefit, I think, would be if the government mirrored private sector's way of doing the business process financially, I think you would have a keenly more robust competitive environment when you went out to buy the services for travel and expense. That would be your outcome. And I'll give you a quick story here, and then I'll promise to get off of here. That thing's running at me. I never saw that thing before. Okay. It's teleprompters. We need them. The issue that I think is pretty interesting is when ETS and eGov was launched, there were 10 to 13 very interested parties on how they wanted to bid on the business. It took us about a year and a half to flesh out the business cases, talk to the marketplace. 13 of those viable companies, I won't go through the long list of them, they were very active. They were meeting all the time. They wanted to know about this, wanted about that. Remember, we'd never done it before, right? DTS had done it, but civilian side's significantly different. There's no command and control on the civilian side, so you have to really bring everybody together a different way. So as we unfolded and the first procurement went to full market, there were 3 awards made. There were only 6 bids. So those 13 viable companies that were around the whole time, at the last second decided they didn't want to bid. Okay. So as we went to ETS2, 10 years later, 7 years later, actually, at the end of the contract, we said, all right, let's go to market again. We didn't change anything. We did it the way we've talked about. Some obligate funds, some don't. We tightly interface it. Can't really buy it commercially. You can't just put a simple contract out there and get that service. There were 8 or 9 big companies talking at the very beginning. Then it got very quiet. And then when we finally got our bids, remember we had 3 vendors in ETS1. We only had 1 new bid. That's it. And the second bid was from one of the incumbents. 2 of the ETS vendors left the building. They didn't want to do this business anymore. So I think what DOD is doing, they took the other transaction authority, they built a strategy, they leveraged off existing functional capabilities in the marketplace today, and they're taking it to their new objective and leveraging the commercial side. That's why I think what they're doing is something we had hoped would come out of ETS 1 or 2, but that did not happen. So I think it's going to be an interesting next 2 to 5 years. I like odd years. I like 19, 23, and 27. I think they're going to be terrific, exciting procurement years for the federal government. That it? Thank you all very much. Appreciate it. I'll wrap it up there. Get that out of the way. Thanks, Andy.
If you don't mind, stay here with me just a second.
Sure. Go ahead.
Hey, hopefully, especially the young folks in the room, you got to pick up on some of these important business principles that Tim here was talking about. You know, acquisition, just a couple key things. Strategic contracts is an important principle that tears down silos. Why have multiple contracts doing the same function? And so to see where we've come over the last, 4 or 5 years, I guess, in this is really amazing, and bringing better buying power, better service to the government, but also taking into consideration the needs of the warfighter and things like that, keeping that at the forefront. And Mr. Burke mentioned you know, that there are strategic reasons for somebody like Transcom to have a relationship with companies. He recognized that it's a warfighting capability for somebody, for all these major cargo carriers and passenger airlines and whatnot. But the passenger airlines is a GSA managed program, but it's strategic to Transportation Command and to the military. So there's a really big benefit here to continuing this process, and I'm really proud, but it brings fiscal responsibility and just getting the mission done. And I hope people listen carefully. There's a lot of important principles in what's happening here in this space. So, Tim, thank you very much again. Appreciate it. At this time, I'm going to ask for a couple folks